Hello, welcome to Staring Down the Storm, Autism Advocacy in America. I'm your host, Tabitha Ziegler. Okay, everybody, welcome back. I have my friend Andy here with me. I'm going to let him introduce himself. Welcome to the show, Andy.
Hi guys, I'm Andy Fitzenrider.
All right, tell us a little bit about what you do, Andy.
Yeah, so I live in Angola, Indiana,
Okay.
which is about 30 miles or so north of Fort Wayne. So
Right.
so
You're right in the corner then.
we're kind of up in the corner where Ohio and Indiana and Michigan
Okay,
all come together.
very good.
So yeah, so I am an outreach coordinator
Okay.
for Relay Indiana.
Mhm.
We are a nonprofit.
Okay.
And we promote telecommunications access for deaf, hard of hearing, and speech impaired folks in the state of Indiana.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a very interesting thing that you do. And I think people would be really interested to find out why you decided to do this.
Sure. So, as you can maybe tell by now,
Mhm.
I'm a person who stutters.
Uh-huh.
I was my parents first kind of noticed something different about my speech pattern when I was, around the age of 2 or 2.5 or so. And that's pretty common.
Mhm.
I mean, with people who stutter, because that's when language is first kind of developing.
Mhm.
And normally, now most kids, by the time they hit kindergarten,
Mhm.
or first grade,
Mhm.
at the latest, the vast majority of kids who are stuttering, especially girls, they will outgrow the condition.
Okay.
For some reason, I was a part of that much smaller percentage that it didn't go away.
And what type of percentage are we talking about?
Right. I'd say maybe between 5 and 10%
Okay.
of us, especially boys, this stuttering is much more prevalent in boys and in males and females.
Mhm.
But I'd say probably between 5 and 10% of us.
Okay.
For some reason, we don't outgrow it.
Mhm.
It doesn't go away.
And how has that limited you as you've been going along? Because I can tell you're a fierce advocate for people.
Absolutely.
And it is nerve-wracking to speak in front of people anyway. But to have any sort of speech impediment or speech impairment, that must make it 10 times as hard to know that you're going to speak it.
Right. What's really interesting, it's really funny because I think I heard it said one time, people fear public speaking more than death.
I believe that. I believe that.
And what's weird is, I've really never been freaked out about public speaking. It's more, the telephone,
Mhm.
which we'll get into. That's always been the most, my most feared speaking situation.
Well, let's just dive right in then. So what is it about the telephone that always makes you fearful?
Right. I know when I was younger, when I was in high school and, in college and, back then, now, I was born in the early 1970s, so, this was this was back in the days, where your phone actually hung on a wall.
Right.
Right. There were no Zoom calls.
Right.
You didn't have all the video
Mhm.
aspects of communication
Right.
that we now take for granted.
Right.
It was really frustrating because when I was younger, again, on the phone, all I had was my voice.
Right.
There was no visual connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was a large part of it. I couldn't see how people were reacting to my stuttering.
Right.
I never knew on the phone, what kind of reaction I might get.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there were several times, when I would call it business, and I would get stuck on hello, that's because it's a vowel sound.
Okay.
Or my name, Andy's it begins with a vowel.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I would just get stuck
Mm-hmm.
and there'd be no sound coming out, so when you don't hear anything for a couple seconds,
Yeah.
people would hang right up. They would think that I wasn't there,
Yeah.
or the call had dropped, so they would just hang up.
Mm-hmm.
Or which happened less often.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, especially, kids used to prank call people.
Sure.
And and kind of have fun on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
And I had several times I called a business just to gather information, and I would be stuttering pretty good,
Mm-hmm.
and they thought I was a prank caller.
Um,
I remember one gentleman, I called some business just to get information, and he basically said if I called back one more time, he was going to call the police on me.
okay.
Yeah.
I believe it though.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so the phone quickly became such a source of frustration.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think it was because, again, there was no visual connection. I couldn't see how you were reacting to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't use any kind of non-verbal communication.
Mm-hmm.
La 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 la, like if I'm stuck on a word.
Yeah.
If I'm talking to you face to face
Mm-hmm.
and I'm stuck, I can kind of put my hand up or my finger up for a minute. Just give me a second.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do that on the phone.
That's true.
But because again, there's no visual
Mm-hmm.
connection. So I think, psychologically, when I knew I had to make a phone call, that just triggered a lot of anxiety.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know, I never knew what I was going to get.
Mm-hmm.
The vast majority of the people are patient,
Mm-hmm.
but, it happened just enough times where I would get a bad react or a negative reaction.
Mm-hmm.
That happened enough times that even the thought of having to call someone I didn't know,
Mm-hmm.
that would just trigger so much anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember in high school, I would drive 45 minutes each way, to a dentist office,
Mm-hmm.
just to schedule an appointment.
So you can speak to them in person.
But because I was so much more comfortable talking to the receptionist face to face, I kind of figured, if worse came to worse, and I was really struggling, really having a hard time, I could always take out a pad of paper and write down what I wanted to say.
Right.
You can't do that on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
So, I learned how to I did a lot of compensating.
Mm-hmm.
I think, talking in general, I learned a lot of ways to kind of cope with it,
Right.
in my own way, um, a lot of how I dealt with it was I just didn't talk
Right.
unless I absolutely had to,
Mm-hmm.
you know, if I got invited to a birthday party or some social event, I would tell my parents I didn't want to go, but because there's probably going to be some other kid there who I didn't know. I didn't know them. They didn't know me. Of course, they're going to ask me my name.
Yeah.
And I didn't want that anxiety. I didn't want to be put in a vulnerable spot where there's a chance that I might get, or I might be exposed as a person who stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I did everything I could to hide my stuttering.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's kind of funny. I'll talk with people who I used to work with, or I went to, or who I went to college with,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll be like, "Andy, I never knew that you stuttered."
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because I never talked.
Well, I can kind of relate to that in a way with my masking, because I didn't even find out that I had autism until I was this year. I'm 42 years old. And I basically learned because I had children that were diagnosed with autism. And as I was going along and I was watching them, and, they had language struggles. And all of this is really interesting to me, kind of ironic, because I was a language major in college. So, language major and linguist, and like I was studying language. And I didn't even identify a delay in my first child because of having multiple languages. So I was trying to teach my older son, Guy, 2 languages. And so often children that learn 2 or 3 languages, and it takes them a little longer. So then watching him learn a little bit, then watching the language regression, and watching him sort of lose his language altogether, and how frustrating that was. And then mirror forward to then me finding out that I had autism and realizing, wow, I've spent an exorbitant amount of energy my entire life in just trying to fit myself in the box, trying to learn all the rules. Like, there's all these unspoken rules to society, and language is a big one, because I think, especially, we're not the same age, but we're of a similar sort of generation, where I think at that time, your parents, your grandparents, people in the community, people at school was like, you're either being lazy, you're not applying yourself, maybe you're not as intelligent as the other kids. So we weren't getting that response of, let's find the source of what's wrong. Luckily for me, I was a good student. I read like at a pretty advanced level, and I spoke fine. So, and then the fact that being a girl, if I were ever quiet, that's actually encouraged. So then to watch my first child, who was a son, which obviously there's certain expectations, and I identify with that based upon what you're saying with, the girls versus the boys, because if you were a girl and you stuttered, that might be sort of encouraged for you to be quiet. But the boys, you guys are encouraged to be a little bit more outspoken.
Yeah.
That must have been really hard for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it was, and yes, everything that you just said there totally resonates with me. Cause yeah, again, I was born in the early 1970s. So,
Yeah.
So I was kind of a child of the 70s and 80s,
Mm-hmm.
And what's really interesting, I think about all the years of speech therapy,
Yeah.
right. every year in public school, you know, I had a different speech therapist. You know, I had a lot of speech therapy in private practice as well.
Mhm.
You know, and we never talked about stuttering.
Mm.
We never, I was never asked, you know, how does that make you feel? Did it dealing with this thing?
Mhm.
What, Andy, what's going through your head? Whoa, 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 when you're sitting there stuck on a board. We never talked about that.
Mhm.
It was the, the mindset was, you know, we are here to fix this part of you.
Yeah.
We are here to correct this deficiency so you can start to live your life.
Mhm.
That was the prevailing attitude back then.
I find that really interesting and timely right now with some of the things going on, because there seems to be, when we should be moving forward in disability rights and advocacy and all that, seems like we're getting stuck or moving backward. And so more of these conversations need to come to light for people to see people as people,
Right.
because I don't think it's going to benefit any of us moving forward with any sort of disability if we start that again, where it's like, right, here's this part of you we need to extract or manipulate or fix, rather than just dealing with the person as a whole. And then we delve into the whole issue of mental health. And I would imagine that, just besides being infuriating for you, like, I imagine you probably felt like, this is wasting my time. There are better things that maybe I can be doing with my time.
Absolutely.
You guys are trying to reinvent the wheel. I don't want to speak for you, obviously, but
Right.
this is what I'm thinking based upon what I watched with my son when he would get so frustrated. And Kai had some behaviors that would be seen as not okay. And thank goodness I was able to get him into ABA school, because my worst nightmare right now is to put him in an environment where people won't understand him or they won't care.
It's scary.
Yeah.
It's scary. It's very scary.
Communication is key. Like, everybody,
Absolutely.
they don't expect, they demand it. And anytime that your communication style is not fitting to a situation, especially the higher up you go in like the rungs of the corporate world, I'd like you to talk on that a little bit, because you've been on the world longer than I have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think things maybe are getting better,
Mhm.
in small
Yeah.
baby steps. But, again, I kind of think back, to when I was, younger.
Yeah.
And the, the kind of what you just alluded to a little bit, it was exhausting.
Yeah.
I spent so much energy and time and tears,
Yeah.
trying to conform to what, I thought other people expected me to be.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I could, the amount of time and energy I spent, more energy, that I spent trying to pretend I was a normal fluent speaker.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, I remember at least a couple times, years, where it would be summer, summer was coming to an end.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew the first day of school was going to be rolling around next week. It was going to be all new kids.
Yeah.
A new teacher, right? What's the first thing you do on the new year, on a new school, the first day of a new school year?
Introduce yourself.
You go around the room, right? Introduce yourself, and say what you did over the summer.
Mhm.
I mean, I remember, several days I would, before that even happened, I would just get myself so worked up,
Yeah.
at the possibility that I was gonna have to introduce myself to a whole to a whole room full of people who don't know me from Adam.
Mhm.
And I was gonna have to, you know, in the blink of an eye, I was gonna have to make myself vulnerable,
Yeah.
very vulnerable. I was going to have to expose this part of me that the world saw as a weakness,
Mhm.
that the world saw as a deficiency, and I was going to have to expose that and see all the shocked reactions.
Yeah.
you know, you know. I remember a couple of years. I remember a, a couple of years as my turn was approaching. I raised my hand and said, I need to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
And I would hide in the bathroom for 20 minutes, hoping that they got the introductions done and they would forget about me.
Yeah. Did they forget about you?
A couple times. I don't, you know, I think it was probably until Thanksgiving until the kids even knew my name, because I just never spoke.
Yeah. Well, I think that brings up another topic. That's why I think the ADA and IEPs are important, because, sometimes disability is not necessarily seen, so just to think how much more you might have learned and how much more productive you could have been if they just played to your strengths. Not villainizing anyone, but
No.
I just think, everybody has their own unique gifts to give to society. And through my own experience and watching my children, and the more people that I meet, I often think, and this is my autistic brain working, I'm not saying everybody thinks this way, but my brain tells me what a colossal waste of time, energy, resources, and talent whenever you could have been taking someone like you that maybe speaking wasn't your strong suit, but I'm sure you had a whole slew of other things that you could have dove into, rather than wasting your time on these things that, were not really beneficial to your education process.
Right. No. Yeah. Again, I feel like I spent way too much energy and time trying to be normal.
Yeah.
Because again, that's, if it was not put in those words, that's what it was implied. I needed to get this deficiency corrected, that then I could start my life. I mean, yeah, and even a couple speech language pathologists, even even said, Andy, you need to be just you you need to be practicing more.
Apply yourself.
Yes, exactly. No, when after I had finished my undergraduate work, I was very interested in going into speech and hearing, because it was so fascinating to me. And I went through the whole application process. I took a bunch of undergraduate classes, so that I could apply to graduate school. I was basically told, by a clinical supervisor that my speech needed to be better, but before I would even be considered for the graduate program. It wasn't my test scores. Academically, I was great, but my level of normal fluency was not where it needed to be.
Mm-hmm. I think that's also bringing up something else that I want to talk about, like the discrimination with people with disabilities, just trying to climb that ladder, if you will, that are really intelligent.
Absolutely.
And it's not a sign of their intelligence, their speech or the way that their brain works, for example. I think it's interesting, the type of conversations that are going on right now. Do you have any opinions on some of the things that have you been following, some of the disability stuff recently?
Not as much.
Yeah.
Not as much.
Do you have any opinion on just in general?
Yeah.
Right. Just in general with thoughts on the ADA and advocacy.
Right. No, I think as we kind of talked off air a little bit, I think it's, and I think that's a big reason why I try to do so much.
Yeah.
It's hard for anyone
Mm-hmm.
with a difference or disability,
Mm-hmm.
but I think especially communication.
Yeah.
It's very hard. Most people with a speech or any kind of communication difference, we're not effective at advocating for ourselves.
Right.
It's much harder, to advocate for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I know a little bit earlier, you kind of brought up the idea of hidden disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
I was just having this conversation the other day with someone.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was in our the stuttering support group.
Okay.
Over in Fort Wayne that I'm a part of.
That's actually pretty awesome. I didn't think that's up there.
Yeah. Because it is hidden,
Mm-hmm.
right? Stuttering and any kind of a speech thing, that might be, I don't know. That might be maybe the condition that society kind of still pokes fun at.
Mm.
I think back to the Porky Pig cartoons of the 1950s,
Mm-hmm.
right? People laughed at that.
Mm-hmm.
People thought that was funny,
Mm-hmm.
or a fish called Wanda, where the guy stutters in the court, people will still laugh at speech.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know very many well-meaning people who are going to see someone in a wheelchair
Mm-hmm.
and openly laugh.
Yeah.
Right. But it's just, we had a really deep conversation about that. I think stuttering and speech, to a certain degree, are still kind of stigmatized
Mm-hmm.
as something to laugh at.
Yeah. How do you think that normal people, right? How do you think people can advocate better for those that stutter? Not just save them, not to make their lives easier or whatever, but just to sort of walk beside.
Right. No, absolutely. First of all, people need to be exposed to it.
Mm-hmm.
Again, a lot of people who stutter, like I was, we're trying so hard to hide it
Mhm.
and be covert because we don't want to be exposed. We don't want to be found out that we have a deficiency.
Mhm.
You know, that again, stuttering's not really put out there much because we're so busy trying not to stutter.
Yeah.
So, it's funny. It's like I'll talk to people and, they'll be like, yeah, Andy, I've been a receptionist for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
You're the first person who's ever called me who stutters.
Yeah.
They
They normally have somebody else call for them.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. See, see, we keep ourselves hidden, but because we don't want that to be discovered, if there's a chance that I'm going to get stuck on a word, I don't want to feel those feelings of shame.
Yeah.
And, and embarrassment, it's a lot easier to kind of think of another word in that moment that maybe I can say fluently because I'm so sick and tired of having to feel the shame and embarrassment that that might come if I take a risk and say that word that might give me problems. It's a lot easier just to say another word and then not have to deal with those feelings.
Yeah. Well, like we were speaking earlier, speaking of being covert, I kind of use that to my advantage sometimes because I'm part of the LGBTQ plus community. And then acknowledging that, knowing that if I start a conversation with someone and there's nothing, glaring about me that would identify myself, I allow people to make that first 5 to 7 second impression because then it's harder to hate that person later. So I also, but I also take that as an, like advantage point to have conversations with other people that they may not be aware of. For example, like the trans community.
Okay.
The T is part of the LGBTQ plus, right? So for me, because whenever I go out into the community, someone may just see me as like this straight white woman, right?
Right.
But I know.
I would.
There you go. Because there's nothing about me necessarily that doesn't identify it.
Right.
But that also opens the world up to many more conversations. So I can tell people when they do find out, because it's not necessarily something I'm trying to hide, but I've just observed this throughout my life, that if you want people to listen to you, sometimes if you don't lead with certain things, they will hear you more clearly. And then I take that opportunity to have bigger conversations like this, for example, because if you and I walk into a room and I start speaking and then you maybe start speaking, but you were with me, you never know how that conversation may go versus if you started speaking and then I'm there with you.
Right.
There's just all these little nuanced ways that I think nobody's perfect. Nobody does things the right way. But if you can find little ways in your life to advocate for people and like have them walk alongside you and, like introduce your friends, but it's not like, oh, hey, here's this trans person, or hey, here's this person that stutters, or here's this, autistic friend of mine, but oh, hey, like here's my friend. And then they get to know you guys. And then along the way, they're like, oh, you can't necessarily do that with your stuttering, but just being able, like putting yourself in rooms with others that are like-minded to have these types of conversations. And then these people go out into the world and like, hey, you should meet Andy. So we're not going to lead with, oh, hey, this is Andy and he stutters. Hey, hey, this is Andy. He's a pretty cool dude. Do you know what he does?
Right.
Put you in a room, like you said, maybe not necessarily on the phone first, or you're doing a lot of advocating for that way, but opening the conversation up to then be like, oh yeah, and this is what I do on the phone, and this is why, and this is how it serves this people.
Right. Yeah. No. Yeah. Yeah. I just really want, I kind of think of myself maybe a little bit as like a sacrificial lamb, a little bit.
I get it.
It's like I'm willing to make myself vulnerable if it's going to help educate somebody.
Mm-hmm.
If it's going to help maybe someone else,
Yep.
who maybe has a speech condition, maybe because I exposed someone
Mm-hmm.
before, maybe that next person who comes along, maybe they won't be judged so quick,
Right.
because I've kind of exposed a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But, I think it's fascinating because disability really touches everybody's family. It's in everyone's community. It's in everyone's school. But it's still this like little dark secret we don't really want to talk about. But we've been living with it because it's always there. And not to mention that disability can happen at any point in our lives. Like we could go out, either one of us, and trip on the sidewalk and break our leg, and who knows what may arrive from that botched surgery or whatnot, and boom, all of a sudden you're disabled.
Right.
And the whole world changes for you.
It does. It's just, no, it does. So yeah, I really to try to advocate. I remember the first time that I stood up for myself.
Mm-hmm.
It was probably the hardest thing I ever did. But after I did it, I don't think I've ever been so proud of myself.
Mm-hmm.
No, I remember, I made a phone, I was in my 20s or something,
Mm-hmm.
I made a phone call just to find out some information about a product.
Yeah.
And the guy answered the phone, and the clerk answered the phone,
Mm-hmm.
and I got stuck on a word pretty good. And the guy just started laughing at me. He started calling me names.
Oh, wow.
He made sexual
Ugh.
references.
Yeah.
And I said, this is BS. For lack of a better word. No.
Yeah. We can say adult words too. I understand.
No, I completely said this is bullshit.
Yeah.
No. The next day, I drove down to the store.
Good for you.
I drove down to the store. I think the dude's name was John or something.
Mm-hmm.
I asked him, John was there, and the supervisor was there. And yeah, I introduced myself very nicely. He heard me stuttering right away, and I think he was like, "Hey, crap."
Yeah.
Right? No, and I said I'm not going to get in trouble, but I demand an apology.
Mm-hmm.
And his supervisor was right there.
Mm-hmm.
She was listening to our conversation. I demand an apology. What you said was very first of all, it was just very unprofessional.
Yeah.
But second of all, you just don't do that to someone.
Mm-hmm.
I belong to a self-help organization called the National Stuttering Association.
Okay.
And they print these little brochures,
Mm-hmm.
called notes to listeners.
Mm-hmm.
How you should react to someone who stutters.
Mm-hmm.
So, I took a couple of those brochures.
Mm-hmm.
I gave one to him and one to his supervisor. And I said, I'm not here to get you in trouble. I don't want to cause, but I do demand an apology. Here's a brochure. So if anyone ever has a speech impairment who calls your business again, I really hope that you will read this,
Mm-hmm.
and you won't be so quick just to Yeah. And again, I walked, I'll never forget the feeling when I walked. I'm like, I finally did something. I finally did something. You know, I still think about that. Yeah, because I mean, like we were kind of, talking off air. No one's going to stand up for you.
That's right.
In this world.
That's right.
And then, and that took me a long time to get.
Yeah.
Because I always wanted to think that, I know my wife and I'll, talk a lot about stuff, and, I have these ideas in my mind of how the world should be,
right?
How I want people to be, but then my wife will remind me that's not how the world. I know you have this idea that you want everyone to treat you the way you treat them, and yeah, in a perfect world that I want, that's how it'd be. But but that's sometimes I have to be reminded that the world's not how I want it.
Well, I think maybe I was talking with some other friends of mine. I think there are maybe more like-minded people out there than we realize. And I've often been speaking to a few people that I didn't really know a lot of other like adult autistic people, and I'm finding them now. And I feel like I explain it like this. I feel like the ground is quaking, and something is opening up, maybe through all this cruelty that we're seeing, and some good things are coming out of it, because that's part of why I'm doing this podcast, is educate people, make people aware. When there are bad actors out there doing bad things, there has to be a tidal wave in the other direction, and you're a really good advocate for all stutters. And I think this conversation is going to be really valuable to people. I mean, it really touched me. And I think anytime someone really opens up their heart and, just speaks the truth, just says it as it is, it's important, it's valuable. And we don't know what little ripples we may be making. I was just told that the other day, because all of us that do this type of work are like, are we really making a difference?
Right.
And then sometimes it just takes a few people telling you, yeah, you are. Like, you may not see it. You may not see it now. You may not see it in your lifetime. Maybe we will create ripples that turn into a tidal wave in the future that we won't be there to see.
Yes.
But it's important to do the work.
Right. I think baby steps are being made. Yeah. One thing I'm encouraged by that I've heard, over the last several years, when I was younger, kind of going back a little, backtracking a little bit to speech therapy, right? I think about, how do you measure progress? How do you measure success? And I remember when I was younger, right? It would be the same thing every year. On the first day of speech therapy, I would read a chapter out of a book, right? Every time I stuttered or got stuck, the speech language pathologist would take her little pen and put a little mark on it, right? In her notebook, right? The next session, it would always start out as, okay, I'm going to have you read this page out of the book. Let's see if we can get those marks down. That was how they measured progress.
Yeah.
By the end of the semester or quarter, if I had cut those marks in half, then I was making 80% progress. But what's kind of interesting also, because in that therapy room, I I could be very fluent, which again was very frustrating.
Right.
You know, I talked to other people who stutter with this condition, and you know, a lot of us have experienced that same thing, right? You know,
You were having a good day.
right, yeah. You know, in that controlled room, you know, in that safe space where I knew I was actually being encouraged to stutter, you know, that you know, for that half an hour every Tuesday at 10, I was actually being allowed, I was being encouraged to stutter. I was allowed to stutter because they wanted to hear it. You know, for the rest of the week, I was not being encouraged to stutter.
Right.
I was not being encouraged to let my voice or my brain do what it defaults to do. And that's to stutter. You know, but no, it was interesting. You know, usually by Thanksgiving, you know, pretty much like death and taxes, right? It was pretty much, it was almost guaranteed. My mom would get you know, every year I would have a different speech therapist in school. You know, usually by Thanksgiving, my mom would get a call from the speech therapist. It was the same thing every year. Yeah, Mrs. Fitzenrider, Andy's been coming here every week since September.
And he's just not making any improvement.
Well, that, but I don't really hear him stuttering very much. Why is he coming? You know, but you know, in that safe space where I was, again, where I was allowing my voice. I was not holding back, right? You know, I was not afraid of being vulnerable. I was much more fluent.
Yeah.
But then as soon as I would go back into the fast-paced world, where judgment and, you know, afraid of being exposed. Yeah. You know, I would go right back into my struggling behaviors. You know, but you know, several years ago, I heard something that really made a lot of sense to me. You know, you know, why are we measuring success, you know, as how many words you say fluently? You know, shouldn't we be measuring success? And this can go for any disability or condition. You know, why aren't we measuring success? You know, doesn't it make more sense to measure success on how is the condition impacting their life? Yeah. You know, quality of life. Doesn't that make that much more? You know, it's funny. You know, I go to these, you know, national conferences every now and then for people who stutter. You know, I've met people, you know, who use their voice for a living. You know, but they may stutter on every other word. You know, it doesn't affect them. You know, that they go ahead and say those words anyway. You know, even though they're afraid. You know, that, you know, it doesn't. They just keep eye contact with you. It doesn't faze them.
Well, maybe you have public speaking of your future.
Yeah. So, you know, and then it's funny, you know, and then you meet other people on the other end, kind of the spectrum, if you will, kind of how I was, you know, sure. you know, where, you know, where you may not hear them hardly ever stutter at all. Because again, they're so busy changing words, you know, and they're so
words they can say.
Right. Yeah. They're so afraid of being vulnerable and being found out that they stutter that you never hear them stutter. But all day they make decisions just
Yeah.
like I did.
Mm-hmm.
They make decisions not on what they want, but on whether they think they could be foolish or not.
I'm curious, have you ever run into someone, and maybe they don't know, right? But I'm curious if you ever ran into anyone that had autism and also stuttered. Because in autism, there's always comorbidities.
Right.
Like, for example, I just found out that my older son has ADHD as well as autism. And I've got 2 more kids. So I wouldn't be shocked because things like this tend to run in families, like autism runs in families, ADHD runs in families, falls under the umbrella of neurodiversity. But being that speech is impacted in autism, I imagine there's some connection there as well.
Absolutely. I know a couple of people with Asperger's who also stutter. So no, I'm sure there's much more.
See, that's fascinating too, because in the autism community, and I'm sort of a newbie really, but there's that whole discussion also within the autism community of should they use Asperger's or should they not? There are some that say yes, some that say no, because of the origin of Asperger's, who was the Nazi doctor that essentially was like euthanizing and practicing eugenics. So there's that camp within autism that's like the high performers, if you will,
Yes.
maybe should not use that terminology and, come into the umbrella of autism spectrum disorder, because it's sort of hard for other people in that community, because it's almost like I'm not saying your friends do this, but just as
Right.
sort of what you're talking about the spectrum of stuttering.
Yeah.
That they're like, we're not in your camp. Like,
Yes.
Asperger's like, no, we're outside of autism spectrum disorder because you low functioning people over here that can't speak well, or, your behavior is not on the same level as us.
I mean,
Isn't that fascinating?
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure it exists.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it exists. I think again, I think a lot of us are so busy trying to not being exposed.
Yeah.
I think it's cool that we're having this conversation.
Yeah.
I think 20, 30 years ago, a person who is autistic and a person who stutters probably would not be sitting at a bar
Right.
having this conversation.
Yeah. But maybe we should be.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think,
I think it's so cool.
humor's needed too. I mean, like, we have to be able to also laugh ourselves, but we just have to help shape the future, especially as a youth, for example, to where it's like, hey, we can all laugh together. You just can't laugh at me anymore.
Absolutely.
Like, I don't want to laugh at you. You don't need to laugh at me, but we can laugh together.
Absolutely. I think about, I think it's important, to let people who don't live with these conditions, I think it's important for them to kind of understand, almost have a definition a little bit.
But we're letting them see behind the curtain.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, I'm sure, would feel like, oh, hey, look at this one. She's late diagnosed and she doesn't really know anything, which I will say, I want to learn. That is why I'm doing this.
Right.
I have kids that will be growing up and I'm trying to make a better life and a better future for them. So that's why I'm doing this. That's why I'm also outing myself. So in a way, I've outed myself twice.
Right.
First time whenever I came out, as part of the LGBTQ plus community, and now again, as an adult with autism.
Absolutely.
So, I'm kind of used to the outing process and I'm comfortable with it now.
Absolutely. No, it's interesting. There's actually a group within the stuttering community. Every year, when they have these, big conferences, where we all kind of meet together, there's a group called Passing Twice.
It's hysterical.
You know,
Not hysterical and like,
right,
laugh at you sort of way, but just
right,
ironic, right?
right.
Because yeah, I would probably have some interesting conversations
You know,
with those people because, you know, the uncomfortable part of these types of conversations, right? Is I always tell people I was gay when it wasn't cool. Like I was gay, and even though there were people that came before me that got it far worse than I did, but I got beat up, I got spit on, I got called names. And I'm not saying that for pity. I'm just saying it to paint a picture. Like I am hoping that these conversations will decrease that type of activity moving forward. I know it already has,
yeah,
but those of us that were around, right? Like same for you, like early on with stuttering, and to have these conversations for the next generations that stutter. They're like, hey, we don't have to do this anymore. We need to advance forward.
like I said, I love that we're even talking because again, for so much of my life, stuttering, we just didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
I think about my dad. Uh, he was I think about how did it looking back.
Mm-hmm.
How difficult it must have been for him.
Sure.
And I don't think I totally understood.
Did he also stutter?
No.
Okay.
Well, according to my mom, he did when he was younger, but he kind of outgrew it.
Okay.
But he was an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
He fixed things for a living.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very, very successful.
Okay.
I think when it came to me in my speech, I think he finally ran into something that he couldn't fix. So I think the attitude was kind of, well, again, if we can't fix it, then there's no sense talking. That was almost kind of, if we can't fix it, if I can't take it away, right? If some speech therapist cannot take this away, then why talk about it?
Do you think maybe that was also his way, in his own way of protecting you, having that sort of thought process?
Maybe. I don't think he knew how to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I think a lot of people didn't know how to deal. I think a lot of SLPs didn't know how to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of think about, well, if you mess up your knee, right?
Mm-hmm.
You go to physical therapy.
Mm-hmm.
You do the exercises, right? You go sit in the whirlpool for 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And then and then 6 months later, you're back running marathons, right? Well, with conditions like stuttering and things like this, it's not a linear thing where you go to physical therapy for 6 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're back, and then you're back as part of the normal world. Yeah. It's not a linear progress in speech therapy is not linear.
Right. I was having a conversation with my mom about my son's ADHD because we just started medication. And I think that's a thing no parent ever wants to do, is to give their child some type of medication for anything. But we were just having this conversation and I was like, Mom, it's kind of like this, right? If you have a heart condition and the doctor gives you medicine, because the doctor is the expert and is supposed to know better than you, they can't fix you per se, but they can help alleviate your pain or alleviate your symptoms. I'm like, that's the closest thing that I can get in my mind to rationalize giving my young son medicine for his ADHD, because all I'm trying to do is make his life easier. I recognize autism is not something that is ever going to be cured, just like his ADHD, and nor would I want it to be. It's part of him. It's part of who he is. So I'm already looking at it from a different lens than some people. I'm not saying I was always there. I'm not saying I always understood everything, because I didn't. But these conversations need to be an evolution, right? And when people start to think about these type of things like that, it's like, you don't hate people. You're not mean to people. You don't have things to say to people with a heart condition. Like they have commercials now, right?
Oh, yeah.
Eat Cheerios. Foods are good for your heart. And like nobody thinks anything of it. Nobody thinks anything of it. Oh, like you have a heart condition. You had a stroke. You have to take medication now because maybe your brain isn't working the same way that it did before. People are making fun. I mean, I'm sure there are some that do, right? But by and large, people are not making fun of people that have a heart condition, had a stroke, something like that. But you flip the table a little bit and start talking about stuttering, autism, ADHD, or whatever. Maybe it is also an age thing. I don't know, a little bit of ageism maybe, but then the conversation changes entirely. When in reality, they're sort of same pieces of the same pie sort of thing. If all you're trying to do is help make someone whole, help improve their quality of life and not dissect them and take out pieces from them because you just want to make their life better.
Right. No, absolutely. As you were saying that, I think back, I think back to the speech that therapy
Mm-hmm.
that I thought was the most helpful to me.
Mm-hmm.
I'll never forget this. I had enrolled in like a summer intensive 3-week stuttering program,
Okay.
like out in Washington State.
Okay.
I mean, we lived on campus in the dorms,
Mm-hmm.
which was super fun at 30 years old.
I'm sure.
I got to go be a college student and live in the dorm.
I would love to be a college student again.
Yeah.
I mean, I really do it up this time.
Yeah. But it was really cool because, the first day of the therapy,
Mm-hmm.
the clinician gets up
Mm-hmm.
and he goes, okay, if you're here to get rid of your stuttering, you picked the wrong program,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll give you your money back. You can leave right now.
What?
And that in terms of therapy and that mindset, that was probably the best thing. That was the first time I had even come to the rationalization. Hey, maybe I can still deal. Maybe I can still learn how to deal with this rather than just trying so hard to come across as fluent.
Mm-hmm.
And we did so many different activities. One of the main things that we did, and it was really hard at first,
Mm-hmm.
was I was given assignments where I was supposed to walk up to just random people on campus, right? And I was supposed to introduce myself, which I feared more than anything. And then I was supposed to tell them that I stuttered.
Mm-hmm.
I was supposed, and at first we're like, I'm not doing that, but the more I did it, it got easier.
Mm-hmm.
It got easier, and the focus was no longer on trying to be fluent,
Yeah.
And doing everything I could to come across as a normal speaker,
Mm-hmm.
but learning ways to kind of manage my stuttering.
Right.
Yes, if you talk to me for 10 seconds, you are probably gonna figure out that I stuttered.
Mm-hmm.
But I was learning how to stutter without all the other struggling
Mm-hmm.
and avoiding, stuff. I often think so. So I'm a big Star Wars geek, right?
Okay.
I kind of, I kind of think back to Yoda,
I love Yoda.
right?
I was hoping you were going to mention
In the Empire Strikes Back, where he tells Luke, you must unlearn all the bull crap that you,
right.
all the bull crap that you've learned,
Right.
right? Yeah, I have a good friend who stutters, and I really liked how he kind of put it in one way. Since that's, we are born, with our brains or something. We are born with a predisposition to stutter.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of our brain default.
Mm-hmm.
But as we get older and we become aware of it, we become embarrassed by it.
Yeah.
We became, we become ashamed of it, but because we see the ashamed looks of our family or people who we're talking to,
Mm-hmm.
So we start to avoid and do all these other behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the goal is to get back to being that young child,
Yeah.
who stutters,
Mm-hmm.
but they go ahead and talk anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Without all these other feelings, that either real or imagined feelings that society puts in our head.
Well, my son, for me, I know I keep mentioning my son, but he's a perfect example of that. So my son likes to wear dresses. He's always enjoyed playing with like the Barbies, and he likes mermaids and all that sort of thing. I never shamed him. I just let him do, right? Because he's a kid and I just want him to play. And it clicked with me one day, just doing different therapies and things like that with him. And I thought, if children are supposed to be a gift, if all of us are supposedly like unique in our own way, shaped in God's image, right? And I know this part's controversial for people, but like I grew up in the Christian faith and I'm working with it. I'm always a work in progress, right? But there are all these things going on in my life. And I was looking at this kid and I was like, if it is true what they say, then we are all made in God's image. And here's this little guy. And when I'm just observing him, right, and I'm not involving myself, just letting him be, he's just perfect. And why would I want to change that? And for me personally, with all the advocacy that I do for everyone, it always boils back to that for me. Is I'm like, when we step back from people, if we just allow people to just be themselves and to just be whole in their own right, it's a beautiful thing. And the minute that we start to influence that, like, original being, that original creativity, that's when you start to really see people shrink. And I was watching that with my son, with little things, and I decided to just go the opposite direction. So it didn't matter whether it was, putting him around certain people or in certain places or wherever. I then started looking at life like this. I'm like, right, is it something I have to do? Are they people we have to be around? And if so, for how long? Why am I going to change my child and shape my child in a way that they may have fear, anxiety, stress moving forward? Because if my goal is to encourage that little human to be the best self that they can be, that's actually, all of that stuff is conflicting with that. So me as his mother, I want to make sure that he's good. All the other adults around him, they just need to figure it out. I'm not going to change this little human and make him fit in this little box when I'm not saying that anybody necessarily does it intentionally, but society paints things in a certain way. It tells us a certain way. I think we have an opportunity, especially with the advocacy, to put that on its head and be like, all these things that people have told us throughout time, maybe they're not right. Maybe it doesn't have to be the standard. If we turn it on its head and then start to have these conversations about take the individual for themselves, what will make them whole? And then it's no longer becomes a conversation of just one tiny box, but several boxes. So whether it's autism, whether it's stuttering, whether it's, transition, whatever, like I think if we start to look at life that way and how can we help people and the questions that we ask, just like you were saying earlier, no one ever asked you, well, how do you feel about stuttering? See, look at me. I can't even pronounce it either.
No, yeah.
Like somebody just needs to ask people once in a while, just be like, I don't know, like, how are you? How are you doing? How are you feeling? Are you okay?
Right.
And people don't ask that stuff.
No. We're just, and that kind of brings up a question too, right? Like I know a couple people who stutter.
Yeah.
And, they just think, all speech therapists are just evil. And they shouldn't even exist.
Mm-hmm.
I think about that. I'm like, I think speech therapy can be okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not against, speech. I like to tell people, I've had good stuttering therapy, and honestly, I've had some stuttering therapy that I thought was a waste of time.
Well, I think, an important thing, this is my opinion, obviously, other people don't have to share it, but I think people like us need to have seats at the table, right? You need to be working in tandem with these therapists because you lived it.
Right.
So people that actually stutter should be at the table having these conversations when they are building programs for speech therapy.
Right.
So that, you lived through that whole cycle and they can literally, like, what better case study?
Right.
It's like bringing a horse to water. Just take it straight to them. You want to learn about stuttering? Well, actually speak to stutterers. You want to learn about autism? Speak to autistic people.
They live.
Yeah, we're living it every day. Like if you have a host of questions, like go straight to the horse.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm like, speech therapy is not evil. Speech therapists are not evil.
Mm-hmm.
Some therapy resonates better with some, with other people.
Mm-hmm.
I know several people, who had stuttering therapy where they the goal was to eliminate it.
Yeah.
And, they practice religiously every day being fluent.
Yeah.
And for them, they feel good about that.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't, I wouldn't say it didn't work for me,
Mm-hmm.
but learning how to live with it.
Yeah.
Learning how to manage it, without beating myself over the head.
Yeah, just being comfortable in your own skin.
And trying to eliminate it.
Mm-hmm.
I felt much more comfortable doing that.
Right.
Yeah, because, for me, trying to eliminate a condition that, as my friend said, I was born predisposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to eliminate a part of yourself.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure. For me, that's not how I want to see.
Well, I think, beating anything out of someone never really works.
No.
Doesn't matter whether you stutter, whether you're gay or whatever. It's like, it doesn't work.
Right.
It never has worked.
No. So, I really try, whenever I have the opportunity, to speak to college students in the speech and hearing field who are going to be working with kids, I know it's the old cliche. I know it kind of gets that, stuttering, does not define me. We hear
I know.
that, stuttering is something I do.
Right.
It's a behavior, but it's not who I am.
Mm-hmm.
It's not who I am. It's a very variable condition.
Mm-hmm.
I spent way too much time, to analyzing and to trying to figure out why I stutter more on Tuesdays than I do Thursdays.
Mm-hmm.
I spent way too much time and energy again, focusing on that. So
But I think, at the end of the day, this might be just like a very basic reference, but when I look at my kids and things like that, I just think things like this, like all of us just want to be able to breathe the same air and the same way.
yeah,
Just go up and be like, and like maybe today's been a day, but in a normal way, right? Like, maybe someone has a bad day at work and they're like, I'm stressed, I had a bad day at work, I want to go have a beer sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like our beer day is harder, I think,
no,
than some other people.
I get it. Yeah.
They'd be like, that part of it, if we can just make that part a little easier for future generations,
Right.
to where maybe at some point in the future, it's not going to matter. Like you said, kind of all of us sitting around a table in a bar sort of thing.
Right. I think with any kind of a neuro speech or whatever, right? Our brains are so complex. You're going to have peaks and valleys.
Sure.
Right. Again, it's, progress is not linear.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have,
Mm-hmm.
it's like a roller coaster,
Of course.
But if we can figure out, when we have, we're going to have valleys, right? But, if we can figure out maybe how not to make those valleys so deep,
Yes.
to me, that's progress.
Well, yeah.
It's not
like you see someone start to trip, you don't stick your foot out.
Of course not.
That sort of thing.
Right. You're going to have days.
Yeah.
Well, where you're going to have a rough patch.
Right.
But I think growth.
Yeah.
I like growth better than progress.
Right.
At time. I think growth can come from, learning how to deal with those valleys again, so that they're not these big, deep crevasses. They're more just a little dip. Yeah. And the more you do that, the more it makes it easier to get back up.
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've covered a lot today.
Okay.
And was there anything else that you really wanted to tell people to?
I just kind of wanted to, just to kind of give a little shout out to, so a lot of what I kind of do, I do contract work for Relay Indiana.
Yep.
And as well as T-Mobile accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
Again, providing assistive technology. I love technology
Mm-hmm.
when I think it helps people.
Right.
And as far as the speech-to-speech service,
Mm-hmm.
That allows speech impaired people to be able to make and receive their own telephone calls.
Right.
I feel so honored and blessed to be able to advocate for their services.
Mm-hmm.
I love anything that I feel promotes, a sense of independence.
Right.
Because, with independence, I think of a sense of dignity.
Of course.
You can't put a price on feeling I can do something for myself. I remember those days of like again, I was in college.
Yeah.
This was before cell phones.
Mhm.
And I lived in the dorm,
Mhm.
and there was a payphone.
Right.
That was the only way I could call my parents.
Mhm.
And it sucked, but because back then, in order to call home, I would have to use the payphone and make a collect call.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
Which involved talking to an operator,
Mhm.
giving them my name
Right.
and saying I want to make a collect call. I felt so incapable
Mhm.
that I would wait until some random dude
Mhm.
from down the hall would walk by, and I'd say, hey buddy, whoa, would you mind
Starting a coffee.
telling the operator that I'm Andy? I'm trying to make a collect call. I would wait until someone was around.
Mm.
I hated that about myself. I just, so again, any kind of technology that promotes independence,
Mhm.
And the sense of dignity. One of the coolest testimonials I ever heard was there was a law student or something
Mhm.
who has cerebral palsy, that affected her speech.
Right.
She experienced a lot of the same frustrations that I did on the phone.
Mhm.
People wouldn't give her a chance. They were just
Yeah.
too fast to hang up on her. If they didn't understand her, they would just hang up on her.
Right.
So she really wanted to continue her law career.
Mhm.
But she knew that she was going to have to call people. That was like, it wasn't her grades.
Right.
It wasn't her, law school tests that she was afraid of.
Mhm.
It was having to talk on the phone.
Mm.
But whoa. When she learned about the speech to speech, telephone relay service,
Mhm.
that gave her the confidence
That's amazing.
to continue her law.
Good for her.
I can't think of a better testimony.
No, but it's really not.
Again, I love assistive technology.
Now, where would people find that?
Sure.
Text to talk on T-Mobile?
Sure. So, a couple different spots. Yeah. If you live in the state of Indiana,
Mhm.
it's www.relayindiana.com.
Okay.
We also provide, for hard of hearing folks.
Okay.
We also provide the CapTel caption telephones,
Okay.
as well as other assistive technology. We operate an equipment distribution program for people who qualify, financially qualified.
Mhm.
There's an application process that you go through.
Mhm.
But if you meet, the qualifications, we will give you a caption telephone or a tablet or a smartphone
Mhm.
that comes with apps that allow you to make your own telephone calls independently.
Mhm.
And then for T-Mobile accessibility,
Mhm.
it's www.tmobileaccess.com, and there's a whole wealth of information on there
Mhm.
about all the different telecommunication assistive technology that they provide.
That's great. So, well, I'm going to ask you the same question I ask everybody. I know we spoke about a lot of things today, but if people don't walk away with anything else from this, besides just this? Who is Andy? What do you want them to walk away from this video really knowing about you?
Right. Oh boy.
I know it's a big one.
No.
Everybody tells me that.
No, I'm Andy, and yes, I stutter. But it's not gonna keep me from advocating for myself or for other people, because not being exposed to it. Just like we said earlier, no one's going to advocate for yourself.
Yeah.
I know it's not, especially with a communication difference, it can be hard,
right?
Because you're making yourself vulnerable, but you're also doing a lot of good as well. And I really, if I think that I'm building exposure, to a condition that's still kind of stigmatized in our society, if I can get people to at least be exposed to it, and maybe have a better idea of how to respond to it,
right?
Then I feel like my mission is going on. I think over the years I began, and I'm still a work in progress.
Right.
I'm looking at my condition more objectively, rather than just automatically being so reactive to it.
Right.
I feel like we live, in such a reactive society.
Yeah.
In this age of social media and 24-hour news, I just feel like our immediate thing is to react.
Sure.
I really want to get people to think, and when they're exposed to something new or something that they're not familiar with, think about it for a minute and not just react to it. That's what I'm trying. I think that would make the world a better place.
I agree with you. Well, Andy, thanks for coming on. Absolutely appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
But yeah, we'd love to have you back. I'm sure there'll be plenty of things for us to see in the future. All right. Thanks. Well, we'll see you next time. Bye. We are at a pivotal point in American history. We do not have the luxury to remain silent. Programs are disappearing every day. We hope that this podcast raises awareness and sparks a sense of advocacy in you. We all can make a difference. The important thing is to start. See you next time.